Hey there, YouTube. Welcome to Big Mike Beard Wisdom. So today, we're going to be taking a look at these moldings and seeing what we can do to fix them. So a lot of vehicles have these. It basically kind of forms a rain channel down the sides. And on most cars, these can come off. On this particular car, because the Astra has these little like luggage rack or maybe like bike mount bar kind of things on it, it seems like it's really soft right there, and I don't want to try and take them off and risk bending these, especially if I can't really find these online. So I haven't really looked because I got other plans. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and take off the remaining little bit of this black plastic or like rubberized coating that's on here, and then hit it with just a little bit of Plastidip. That way it still has a somewhat durable rubberized coating, but just doesn't look quite as bad. So to start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of tape here on the edges. That way if I get a little wild and crazy with either like a scraping tool or utility knife trying to get some of this black plastic scraped off, I don't wind up hitting the paint and doing any damage I don't want to do. I got this all taped off now on both sides. Now this side's by far the worst side, so you can definitely see how this stuff just kind of cracked up and flakes off. And this happens to a lot of different cars. It's just this stuff's getting old. Maybe the substrate underneath is getting a little oxidized or something like that, causing it to separate. So it can be a bit of a pain in the butt. My initial thoughts are to essentially take the razor blade, or the razor knife, kind of pry it up and pop it as much as I can. If that doesn't wind up working, what I'll probably wind up doing is just running this down gently down the sides, seeing if it kind of scours the side a little bit, and then if this will come off nice and easy, or if it winds up being a pain in the butt. But once I get this stripped off to the point that I think it should look okay to paint, then I'll go ahead and start painting it. Little things like this over here, where it's just starting to crack off and hasn't finished yet, that'll show through on the Plastidip. This is pretty much clear now. I've got most of it off. There's some little areas over here where it's a little inconsistent, but I'll clean that up just a little bit. And what I want to do is just take a little bit of sandpaper just to help smooth this off, get this cleaned off, and then we'll move on to painting. So this is sanded down real quick with 500 grit sandpaper and 1000 grit sandpaper, and it kind of looks cool, just the way it is. But I really want to put it back to black, just so it kind of matches the other trim components of the car. And then also, that way it blends in with those white filler panels that I have, that I've painted with the Plastidip already. We've got this all taped off. What I'm hoping is that I can do this without making a huge mess. And the nice thing about it being really kind of skinny is that this will help reduce any kind of weird issues you might get when you're using the Plastidip. So it's kind of one of those things where sometimes if you're doing just a small area, that's way easier to wet out and have good quality versus doing a large area, like either the whole car with a can or something like that. And I gotta really not look at this because I'm like, hey, racing stripe. But both sides are all done. This side over here took a little bit longer. So because that paint or vinyl was in a little bit better condition, it was a little tougher getting it off. All in all, getting all the black off, getting this sanded down, probably looking at about an hour to do both sides. So about, that side maybe about 15 minutes. This one was more like 45. So depending on the state of that vinyl or the paint or the rubberized coating that's on there, you might be in for a fight. This one, it was mostly like an old adhesive that appeared to be stuck on, whereas the other one had a fair amount of corrosion underneath. And then with that corrosion coming off, it left just a little bit of like minor pitting. But I'm hoping it turns out all right. So next up, Plastidips in the can, warming up. And it's one of those things where you always want to kind of warm the bottles up. So today we're kind of lucky. It's a warmer day for the middle of November. But I've got these in warm water. That way they're warming up pretty good. And then I always give them a shake and then put them back in. That way any kind of like, you know, paint in the center that maybe hasn't gotten fully warmed up, everything gets nice and homogeneous theoretically. I always like using one of these little sprayers to make it a little bit easier. All it does is just push down inside onto that. You can see I've used it a few times on a couple of different colors over the years. And these work on most cans. They just hug the lip up there and they just push down on top. Fairly simple. Instead of having to use your finger the whole time, you can use your whole hand and just squeeze. The first coat, you want to put just a light tack coat. So you're just trying to establish a little bit of paint on there. That way it's not fully covered and not fully coated. You want it just to have a little bit on. That way that little bit dries and gives it a little bit of like a anchoring, to think of it, onto the stuff you're painting. That way the next coats all stick better. If you were to paint this right away with a heavy wet coat, there's a chance it won't stick the way you want it to, and it may wind up peeling off unexpectedly. And then of course, don't forget your PPE. So definitely recommend a respirator. This stuff smells pretty funky. And as you can see, this is starting to get a little old. Probably about time for me to replace the filters. Here's the first coat. As you can see, kind of light. So I went just back and forth real quick across it. And then on the other side, I had the better idea of maybe just zipping across real fast. Now, in doing that, I didn't move as fast as I was hoping to move. So it still looks a little bit light color-wise, but I wanted to go a little bit lighter on this. And then that's a long pull because you're walking down the side of a car. So in order to try and maintain as smooth and consistent of a pass as possible, you got to move your feet. So it's kind of one of those things where if you don't have anything kind of planned out for how you're going to do it, you may want to do that now. Because in the first coats, you can mess up a little bit and then you can come back and fix it later. But in the later coats, you really can't. So all I'm doing is trying to figure out how to walk back and forth so that this camera looks kind of smooth, which hopefully the paint can will look nice and smooth. You can kind of see I messed up a little bit when I painted these before. And the nice thing about Plastidip is that essentially you can always do it again. And off of this plastic, this peels nice and easily off. Even one-handed. So while I wait on those other parts to dry, I'm going to go ahead and redo these. That way, hopefully, once everything dries out, I can put all these in and they'll all look about the same with a decent, level of quality. So instead of having like how this had those weird little bubbles and stuff, hopefully this will be nice and pretty when I'm all said and done with it. All right, and then one of the biggest things with using Plastidip in the cans is essentially you need to recognize when the can's starting to get low, because as it gets low, depending on how the can's pointed, it can start to sputter and spit. So if a can starts getting light, then you're better off going ahead and switch to a different can, using this for small little things if you need it. So like if you're going to touch up like a handle to something or something like that, or like in my case, those little filler panels will get painted with this, whatever's left in here. But this is light enough now that I don't want to make a big run with it. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to this one. Move over the good tip that I have. And do the rest of the coats. All right. So we're on about the fourth coat. You can see I've been laying it wet on these last few coats, and it's coming down pretty good. So everything's coming out nice and smooth. There have been a couple whoopsies, but I think most of those are starting to balance out. Kind of get a little bit better view over here. You can see the light bulbs in the ceiling. Same thing with this side. So it's laying down pretty good as well. This hasn't dried just yet, so still got to give it a little bit of time. I want to do just a handful more coats, probably 2. But you can kind of see right about here, so right there, that little bit of a line. All that was me kind of messing up with my footwork and pausing a little bit too long. And it didn't so much cause a run as much as it just kind of stacked an extra little bit of stuff there. So you can kind of see, as I use the reflection of the other bulb, as it breaks right there, there's just a little bit of a elevation jump. So I'm kind of hoping if I keep applying a few more coats, that may smooth out just a little bit. But even if it doesn't, so far, pretty happy with where it's at. So essentially, I'm just pushing my luck. Trying to see how much better it'll get. Because I want to put a little bit extra, especially up here. Because this is going to get battered probably the most, besides anything on the exact front of the car. Having stuff on the top, that's where all the rain's coming down and hitting. If you get hail, that's where hail's going to hit, which in which case, you know, on this car, it'll probably be totaled if it ever had hail damage. But, you know, this is where you're setting your coffee cup. This is where you're setting your backpack. This is where you're setting things. So there's a chance it might get scraped or scratched. Having a little bit more buildup here will help this be a little bit stronger. And then another little tip is to essentially every now and then check out how everything looks. So you want to make sure that you've been painting it from multiple angles to ensure that you've got good coverage on all the sides. Now for me, painting this, I can only really see it from this side. Otherwise I'd have to look across the car to try and see. So having either a mirror or using your phone, you can easily kind of look down the side and seeing if you get good coverage on this side or not. And another thing is that depending on how much space you have, so like right in here, you can see there's a fair amount of space between the tape there, off area, and what I'm painting. But like up here, it gets really tight. A lot of times what I'll do is while the coat is still a little bit wet, I'll come in there with just like a razor blade and kind of push and make sure the tape's pushed away and pushed back. Why use a razor blade? Mostly because it's just one of the thinnest things that I know that's relatively stable to push stuff with. Also, if it does wind up having a situation where you're forming to the other object, so somehow this coat is bonding to the tape, that razor blade will help cut it. But so far so good. It seems like everything's mostly separated. I've only had to do that in a couple spots. So it's just about ready for the last coat. So pretty much all the bugs in the garage have one last chance to jump in it and screw everything up. We did get one little bug jump in there. But I'm really glad, like right around here where we had that little bit of a layer, so where it was built up just a touch, I think that went up leveling out. I think it was about right where I have that bulb kind of reflecting right there. So that leveled out pretty good. Enough that just like, you know, walking by, you don't notice it. So unless you know what you're looking for, you can find it. But it looks pretty good. So now I'm going to head and remove the tape. I think I may score just along the edges again one more time, just to make sure that everything's nice and detached. And then I'm going to remove these in a way that I can reuse these, because I've got another project I'm doing right now. So one of the good things about putting on a whole lot of coats is that it builds a lot of strength into the Plastidip. So if you do have to remove it, it's easy to remove, and you can kind of see just by lifting this tape, it starts to pull this up. So if I was in the mind, you know, to kind of remove this, then it'd be easy enough to just kind of start it, grab some, and peel it off. And a lot of times, as long as you've got a good separation in there, the joints, or where the different panels meet, will be kind of weak, and it'll be really easy to break. So like as I come to this edge, it just separates and comes up. And pulls the tape up a little bit too. So here's a good view of the finished product. Everything came off pretty good. You can still see a bit of the tape lines, but that'll come off in a good like car wash and stuff. Otherwise, you could probably also just like hand wash it off real quick. And then with those little plastic inserts, those came out much better too. They match really well. The only thing is that I can kind of see where my fingerprint touched it, just because my fingers were dirty. But otherwise, this looks pretty good. So way better than it did before, with big giant gaping holes. And like the vinyl or rubber coating kind of peeling off. So I'm very happy with this. I think this came out pretty good. A little bit less of an eyesore. Looks nice and smooth. Everything blends in really well. You can definitely see this looks pretty good. Not so much of an eyesore anymore. This is a little weird with how it's kind of sitting kind of flat in the center but high on the edges. But we'll see how that goes. That definitely looks way better though. And then having the holes filled in definitely draws your eye much less to any kind of weirdness that was in it. So it looks like this one's about the same. So it must be due to the curve right here and the plastic piece being fairly flat. But, and that came out pretty nice. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to like and subscribe. I'll check you next time. Someone should have cleaned the garage before doing a video.